Hi guy, welcome back TV spoilers. Nick walked into this situation not with the illusion that he could win, but with a colder, sharper choice. If someone had to pay the price to pull Sienna out of Matt's hands, he accepted that it would be him. What was happening in Genoa City had turned the air heavy like a sealed room with no exit. Nick understood that Matt wasn't merely a blackmailer or an ordinary villain. Matt lived for control. The kind of man who fed on the sound of panic and grew more lethal the more cornered he became. That was why, the more urgently Nick wanted to move, the more he forced himself to slow down inside, to stay measured, to remember that even a single flash of impatience would be entertainment for Matt and Sienna, would be the one to suffer first. Nick was running toward Sienna. Yet somewhere deeper he also knew the rescue might not end in relief or reunion. It might end in a brutal exchange, with him becoming the offering that bought her freedom. In the moment when hope seemed to flicker, Sienna did what no one believed she could do. She pulled Nick out of a disadvantage he couldn't break alone. But that same instant snapped everything onto a darker track. Because Matt never played a hand with only one layer. He allowed people to believe the power had shifted, let them taste the edge of escape. And then he crushed it in the most merciless way. Nick had barely felt air return to his lungs when a chill crawled up his spine, danger announcing itself like instinct. In the driver's seat, the cramped space turned into a perfect trap, where proximity became a weapon and resistance became useless. And then Nick's worst fear arrived. Matt wrapped his hands around Nick's throat right there, on the driver's seat, as if to remind everyone who decided who breathed, who was stripped of breath, who would be saved and who would be used as the substitute. Matt didn't hurry. He moved with the eerie calm of someone convinced the outcome was already written. He played the sick game of release and tightened, not because he needed time, but because he wanted reactions. He pretended to remove Sienna's cuffs just enough to make her believe he was yielding, that negotiation was possible, that this nightmare might end in a compromise. But it was a trap with a polished surface. Matt understood how the human eye clung to the symbol of freedom. And once someone believed the cuffs were off, their guard would drop for a single beat. A single beat was all he needed to reclaim total control. Nick saw the deception more clearly than anyone. He knew this uncuffing was not mercy. It was bait. Not an open door, but an invitation to step deeper into a locked room. As panic and tension surged, Matt chose to stab straight into the mind by announcing himself, as if he were on a stage, and demanded the audience remember his name. He stated plainly that he was Matt Clark. No evasion, no disguise, no fear of consequences. It was a challenge, a deliberate shattering of the idea that exposing him would make him retreat. He even warned that he was as dangerous as everyone said. A line that sounded like bragging but functioned as a nail hammered into collective fear. He didn't need a mask because he believed he still won without one. For Nick, that confession was a weight dropping into his chest. Because it meant something worse. Matt was no longer protecting an escape route. A man who no longer cares about a way out is a man who can do anything. Sienna, standing at the edge of survival, refused to swallow the truth in silence. She called Matt cruel, not only to fight back, but to keep the human part of herself alive. The part that believed naming evil was the only way to avoid going numb under it. But her fury quickly swung toward Annie, because the longer Sienna watched her, the clearer it became that this couldn't be an isolated kidnapping. Sienna confronted Annie about what she gained by coming back, what Annie truly received by attaching herself to Matt and turning herself into a gatekeeper. Sienna was not only angry about being restrained, she was furious at being treated like an object passed between people who believed they had the right to decide another person's fate. For her, Annie was the most dangerous question, a woman returning at this moment, standing in this position, making these choices, must have a motive big enough to smother whatever conscience she had left. The uncuffing performance continued as Matt used it like psychological torture. He loosened Sienna's restraints again. But the terrifying part was that freedom existed only as a shadow. The second Sienna tried to run, Annie stopped her. That obstruction wasn't merely physical, it was a declaration that Annie had chosen a side. That the only door of escape that had cracked open was slammed shut by the one person who might have become an ally. Sienna went cold. She realized she wasn't only trapped by metal but by a network of decisions around her, where every choice other people made dragged her deeper into darkness. Nick watched in a helpless, crushing rage. He wanted to rise, to intervene, but Matt's invisible grip still strangled every chance to move. And Nick's pain wasn't only the lack of air. It was the agony of seeing Sienna within reach and still knowing she could be talked just by Annie's refusal to let her go. Then Matt began to drop hints that it was time to say goodbye. He didn't mean goodbye as in ending a conversation, but goodbye as in erasing a chapter of someone's life. The air inside the car thickened as if time itself had slowed down just to stretch the fear. Sienna understood he was preparing to take her somewhere her screams would be meaningless. In this moment, Annie wasn't just witnessing, she was assisting. Annie would help Matt take Sienna away by car. The truth hit like a hammer. Annie was no longer a variable to persuade. She was a gear already locked into Matt's machine. For Nick, it was the instant he fully grasped the cruelty of the exchange. He had rushed in to save Sienna, but Matt was turning him into the sacrificial pin, the obstacle to be removed so the car carrying Sienna could roll away untouched. Nick was forced into a state of fighting and calculating at the same time. He knew if he collapsed, everything would close forever. If he fought too early, Matt would use it as justification to unleash worse violence on Sienna. Balanced on the razor's edge between protective instinct and strategic restraint, Nick endured the choking pressure like a reminder that he could die because of his own choice. Yet that endurance made him even more determined. If he had to be the substitute, he would stretch the seconds as far as they could go to give Sienna a gap, no matter how narrow, no matter how fragile. He saw Matt and Annie preparing to move, saw their cold coordination, and understood the game was shifting. This was no longer about holding or releasing, this was about taking. About cutting off every trace. And everything closed on a fracture point that made it impossible to breathe. Annie moved Sienna toward the car, the engine ready, the tires ready to carry her away, while Nick, the man who risked everything to rescue her, was held in place on the driver's seat, where Matt tightened his grip as if he meant to crush the last living thread of hope. In that final instant, only one question hung in the air like a blade: would Nick truly become the substitute? Or did he still have one last move left before the car carrying Sienna vanished from every familiar road in Genoa City? The confrontation between Annie and Sienna was no longer a simple struggle, it became a tight, wire-strung battle where every movement threatened to change the outcome. Sienna was forced to fight on instinct, because she could feel Annie wasn't there just to watch or restrain her. Annie was doing what an ordinary person wouldn't do. If even a shred of hesitation still lived inside, there was a cold determination in the way Annie advanced. As if violence wasn't a sudden eruption but a calculated choice meant to snap Sienna's will. Sienna sensed it in every second she was pressed down, in the raw truth of being treated like an object that could be dragged past her limits, without anyone feeling the need to apologize. The air grew suffocating, not only because of fear, but because cruelty was being carried out with unsettling calm. Annie turned rough with Sienna first, as if to underline that Sienna had no right to decide anything anymore, that any resistance would only make it hurt more. And right in the middle of that, Matt appeared like a director stepping onto his own set. Checking the scene, he'd staggered, then giving Annie a symbolic signal, a goodbye kiss. It wasn't tenderness, it was ownership. He wanted to stamp his authority on the moment, as if even Sienna's misery belonged to him as part of a ritual. He believed he had the right to perform. For Sienna, that kiss wasn't just degrading, it was a declaration that Matt believed he was winning. It ignited a desperate rage inside her, a rage that clung to her body like the only remaining flotation device. As her mind threatened to drown, she had no weapon, no escape route, and no guarantee anyone would arrive in time. So her response turned primal, both self-defense and retaliation at once. A way to prove she still existed, that she still had the power to make him feel pain. Sienna bit down on Matt's lip hard enough to draw blood, and for a heartbeat she almost felt she'd reclaimed a sliver of control. But Matt didn't retreat like a wounded man. He looked at her the way a predator looks at prey that has only exhausted itself. And that was the truly terrifying part. Matt didn't treat bleeding as loss, treated it as the beginning of the final act. With his hands, he made it clear that the last price would not be his blood, but her breath. When Matt tightened his grip around Sienna's throat, he turned her defiance into permission for more brutality, as if he were teaching her a lesson about hierarchy. In his eyes lived a sick promise: he would be the one who bled last, the one who decided, who survived to the end. While Sienna was being choked by Matt and crushed under Annie's brutality, another battle was unfolding in the shadows of Genoa City, a battle of calculation, surveillance, and people who understood that if they were late by even a single beat, everything would collapse. Victor received updates from his security team about how they were quietly pushing Matt into a corner. For Victor, this wasn't simply a rescue operation, it was a control problem, a race to contain a threat before it shattered his family. He couldn't allow Matt to keep dragging out the game. Couldn't allow him to choose the time and place, because every extra minute gave Matt another chance to change the planer, to become even more vicious. Victor's team used drones to pinpoint Matt's location, turning the sky into an unblinking eye, silently collecting traces until they formed a destination. They knew where Matt was, or at least where he was moving, and they would wait in the nearby area, not rushing in blind, but holding until they received a signal, a moment solid enough to strike. It all ran like a machine, but even a machine could fracture when the variable called family crashed into it with emotion. Adam and Victor both stepped in to resolve everything connected to Matt as quickly as possible. But Adam's presence wasn't just reinforcement. It was proof that fear had reached deeper levels, the fear that Victor might no longer be safe enough to stay at the center of the storm. Adam wanted to take Victor's place in the remainder of the plan, not because he craved heroism, but because he still carried the raw shock of Victor having been shot not long ago. Adam saw the situation through a private terror. How much more could their family endure? And would they survive if Victor was pulled into danger again? Inside Adam, there was real conflict, one part desperate to prove he could protect the family, another part terrified that every effort only dragged them closer to tragedy. He didn't want Victor to become the next target in a chain of disasters. He didn't want the price of ending Matt to be the life of the father the whole family still depended on to remain standing. So Adam voiced his concern. And beneath that concern lived an unspoken plea. Let him carry the danger. Let Victor live as long as possible. Victor reassured Adam. But that reassurance wasn't only meant to calm his soul, it was Victor affirming how he viewed power and responsibility. The right person had to be placed in the right position, and the plan had to move forward in the structure already set. Victor pointed out that Nick would be responsible for the next phase regardless. The statement carried a painful truth. Nick had been pulled past the point of return, and Victor knew Nick would never accept staying on the sidelines, especially when someone's life was on the line. In Victor's mind, placing the next phase in Nick's hands was both strategy and acknowledgement. Nick's emotions could become a weapon or they could become a weakness. Still, Victor chose to trust him, perhaps because he believed that when Nick was pushed to the edge, he would find a way to turn feeling into force instead of letting it break him. When Nick received the security updated news that Matt's location had been narrowed down, that a signal was coming, that the net was tightening, didn't have time to breathe in relief. That information wasn't an ending. It was the opening to the most dangerous part, confronting a desperate man holding Sienna's life. Nick understood the biggest trap at this stage was confidence. If he trusted the team and the technology to blindly, he would walk exactly where Matt wanted him. If he treated this as already secured, he would pay in blood. That was why Nick felt colder still when Sharon and Noah insisted on going with him. Their insistence wasn't simple recklessness, it came from the unbearable idea of sitting back, waiting and feeling powerless. Sharon carried fear like a mother's instinct, sharpened by the knowledge that everything could spin out of control in a heartbeat. Noah, stretched between love and duty, felt that if he didn't go, he would never forgive himself, not only because of Sienna, but because Matt was manipulating their entire family like puppets. Nick looked at them and recognized what made the plan most fragile. Love and loyalty drove people into danger, and that same loyalty made them easier for Matt to exploit. Nick wanted control, wanted to keep Sharon and Noah safe, but he also knew they wouldn't retreat. Matt had pushed them to a point where backing down felt like surrendering to humiliation. The three of them were pulled in the same direction like gravity toward a black hole, where reason had to fight not to be crushed under emotion. And as they moved toward the confrontation, somewhere else Sienna was still being choked by the hands of a man who had promised to be the one who bled last, while on the person who should have been a lifeline stood like the final border between freedom and darkness. As the net tightened through drone surveillance, as security waited for the signal to strike, as Victor held the plan steady and Adam forced himself to trust it, Nick couldn't escape one truth: the more Matt was cornered, the more willing he would be to do what no one could predict. And the moment Nick, Sharon, and Noah advanced toward the target zone, a cold realization passed through them, unspoken but understood. If Matt knew they were coming, he would prepare a blow that would leave them no time to react. Because when a man like Matt says goodbye, he isn't only saying goodbye to a victim, he's saying goodbye to his own limits. And the most haunting question now wasn't whether they would find Matt, but when they did, what would they discover had already happened to Sienna before the signal was ever given? My TV Spoilers channel is always looking for content inspiration for each video. By compiling short video clips to analyze and offer personal opinions, this channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.